Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Today, we're diving into one of the most influential books ever written, Don Quixote, Part 1 by Miguel de Cervantes, published way back in 1605. This masterpiece is considered the first modern novel and has given us iconic phrases like tilting at windmills. So grab your armor and let's explore this incredible story. Don Quixote was originally published in two parts. The first in January 1605 and the second in 1615. The book was an instant success, so popular that multiple editions were printed within months. Today, it's one of the most translated and best-selling books of all time. The full title is The Ingenious Gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha, and it's a brilliant parody of the chivalric romances that were popular back then. So who is Don Quixote? He's actually a middle-aged gentleman named Alonso Quixano from La Mancha, Spain. This guy reads so many books about knights and chivalry that he literally goes insane. He becomes completely obsessed with the world of knights, damsels, and heroic quests. One day, he decides, I'm going to become a knight-errant myself. He gives himself the name Don Quixote de la Mancha, names his old skinny horse Rocinante, and declares a peasant woman named Aldonza Lorenzo to be his ladylove, whom he calls Dulcinea del Toboso. Don Quixote sets off on his first adventure alone. He arrives at an inn, but in his delusional mind, he sees it as a magnificent castle. He mistakes two women outside for princesses and a scheming innkeeper for a castle keeper. Here's the funny part. He realizes he hasn't been properly knighted yet, so he begs the innkeeper to knight him. The innkeeper, seeing that Don Quixote is clearly mad but wanting to have some fun, agrees and performs a bizarre knighting ceremony. Things go wrong when Don Quixote attacks some guest at the inn who try to use the well where his armor is resting. The alarmed innkeeper quickly finishes the ceremony and sends him on his way. On the road, Don Quixote tries to help a young servant boy named Andres, who's being beaten by his master. He makes the master promise to stop and pay the boy his wages. But the moment Don Quixote leaves, the beating gets even worse. This shows how Don Quixote's good intentions often lead to bad consequences. Later, he encounters some merchants and demands they proclaim that Dulcinea is the most beautiful woman in the world. When they refuse, he attacks them, but his horse stumbles and he falls. The merchants beat him severely and leave him by the roadside. A neighbor eventually finds him and takes him home. Back home, Don Quixote's niece, housekeeper, a priest, and a barber are all deeply worried. They blame his collection of chivalric romance books for his madness. So they decide to burn most of his books and wall up his entire library. When Don Quixote wakes up and asks about his books, they tell him an enchanter stole the library. A few days later, Don Quixote recruits a poor farmer named Sancho Panza to be his squire. He promises Sancho that in exchange for his service, he'll make him governor of an island. Sancho, being a simple but hopeful man, agrees, and they sneak off together without anyone seeing them. This is where the story gets even better because now we have this amazing duo, the delusional idealist Don Quixote and the practical, down-to-earth Sancho Panza riding on his donkey. Now we come to the most famous scene in the entire book. As they're traveling across the plains, they see about 30 or 40 windmills. But what does Don Quixote see? Giants, massive giants with long arms. Sancho tries to warn him. Your worship, those are windmills, not giants. But Don Quixote won't listen. He's convinced these are monstrous giants, and it's his duty to defeat them. He charges at full speed on Rocinante, shouting battle cries for his lady Dulcinea. His lance catches in the windmill sail, and as the wind turns the sail, it shatters his lance into pieces and throws both Don Quixote and his horse violently to the ground. When Sancho rushes over to help him, Don Quixote explains that an evil enchanter must have turned the giants into windmills at the last moment to rob him of his victory. This scene perfectly captures Don Quixote's character. He literally cannot see reality, only his fantasy world. The adventures continue. Don Quixote and Sancho encounter two Benedictine monks traveling with a lady in a carriage. Don Quixote, of course, thinks the monks are evil enchanters who have kidnapped a princess. He attacks them despite Sancho's protests. One monk falls off his mule and poor Sancho gets beaten by the servants while trying to take spoils from the battle. Don Quixote gets into a fight with a Basque squire accompanying the lady, and the narrator dramatically cuts off the story right as Don Quixote is about to deliver the final blow. Cervantes introduces a fictional Arab historian named Cide Hamete Benengeli as the original author of the story, adding another clever layer to the novel. Later, they encounter a chain gang of galley slaves, criminals being transported to work on Spanish ships. Don Quixote talks to each prisoner and they all tell him sob stories that make their crimes seem justified. Feeling sorry for them, Don Quixote attacks the guards and frees all the slaves. But when he demands that the freed slaves go present themselves to Dulcinea, they refuse and actually attack Don Quixote and Sancho instead, stealing their belongings. Sancho is terrified because freeing the prisoners was a serious crime, and now the Holy Brotherhood, the police, will be after them. Fleeing into the Sierra Morena mountains, they meet a half-mad young man named Cardenio. He tells them a tragic story about how his friend Don Fernando betrayed him by stealing his beloved Lucinda and marrying her against her will. Meanwhile, back in Don Quixote's village, his friends, the priest and the barber, are determined to bring him home. They devise a clever plan and meet a wronged woman named Dorotea in the forest. She had been seduced and abandoned by the same Don Fernando from Cardenio's story. They convince Dorotea to pretend to be Princess Micomicona, a damsel in distress whose kingdom has been stolen by a giant. The plan is to get Don Quixote to help her, which will lead him back toward home. Everyone ends up back at the same inn from earlier, the one Don Quixote believes is enchanted. And here's where things get wild. Don Fernando and Lucinda also arrive at the inn. After emotional confrontations and tearful speeches, the couples are sorted out correctly. Cardenio reunites with Lucinda and Don Fernando returns to Dorotea. But Don Quixote, in his sleep, thinks he's fighting the giant who stole Princess Micomicona's kingdom. He actually attacks several wineskins, slashing them with his sword and flooding the inn with wine. He's convinced he's defeated the giant. An officer from the Santa Hermandad arrives with a warrant for Don Quixote's arrest for freeing the galley slaves. But the priest begs the officer to have mercy because Don Quixote is clearly insane. The officer agrees. The priest and his friends build a wooden cage and trick Don Quixote into getting inside by making him believe he's under an enchantment. The cage is placed on an ox cart and they start the journey home. Along the way, Don Quixote has a learned conversation with a Toledo canon about the truth and value of chivalric books. The canon criticizes them as untruthful, but Don Quixote passionately defends them. At one point, they let Don Quixote out of the cage to eat, and he immediately gets into fights, first with a goatherd, then with a group of pilgrims who beat him into submission. Finally, he's brought back to his village. So what makes this book so special? First, it's incredibly funny. The contrast between Don Quixote's noble delusions and harsh reality creates brilliant comedy, but it's also deeply human. Don Quixote represents the power of imagination and idealism, even when divorced from reality. Sancho Panza represents practical common sense. Together, they create one of literature's greatest friendships. Part 1 of Don Quixote ends somewhat abruptly with Don Quixote back home, seemingly defeated and listless. The narrator mentions that he's found manuscripts describing Don Quixote's further adventures, which sets up Part 2, published 10 years later in 1615. This book has influenced countless writers and artists over the past 400 plus years. It gave us the word Quixotic, meaning idealistic and impractical, and the image of Don Quixote tilting at windmills has become a universal symbol for fighting imaginary enemies. And so ends part 1 of Don Quixote, the tale of a man who refuses to accept the world as it is and instead chooses to see it as it could be. But Don Quixote's story is far from finished. His journey, his dreams, his battles, and his friendship with Sancho Panza continue. Stay tuned. The adventure continues in part 2 of this wonderful novel. If you enjoyed this summary, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments. Have you read Don Quixote? What did you think? And what book should I cover next? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.